Yo, what is going on YouTube? Welcome back to another video. I am so excited today to showcase you guys my Bowvoker build. This build is absolutely monstrous. I've been having a great time with it. It's really powerful. It does require a bit of investment. It's definitely an endgame build, but I would say it's one of the strongest bow builds you can make in the entire game, and that is not even, not even close. So, what is this build, and why are we playing an Invoker with a bow? Well, I will explain that now. So, there's a lot of good bow skills in the game, but one of the ones that feels the best to use here is actually called Gas Arrow. And I've gone over a video about like a leveling strategy with this skill, but now we're taking it into the end game and we're scaling the damage a lot. And this skill is amazing for mapping because it's just a targeted AoE explosion. And basically what happens here is this gas will then be ignited by this helmet. This helmet ignites nearby enemies, and those enemies will trigger the gas to explode, and then that is doing all the damage. On top of that, these explosions just do so much damage that they pretty much will guarantee to trigger our heralds. And we've got two heralds here that are kind of piggybacking off each other. And they also can crit, so like this damage is a little bit off. This is double that, basically, with ambush. So yeah, we're getting like close to 80,000 damage with our herald chain, which is insane. And this is without any buffs up. With buffs up, I think my gas arrow goes over 300,000, and my heralds both go up to like 50,000, so, or like 50 or 60,000. So the damage is absolutely absurd. But to get this kind of damage, you are going to need some good gear, because this is a build you can't really get going until you reach certain breakpoints as far as like crit is related. So we are playing the Invoker for one main reason. I tried this build out on a Deadeye, and it just didn't work out as well. And that is because we are trying to go crit, and this Ascendancy node right here solves a lot of problems. So this build is a tri-elemental build. It does all three damage types: fire, lightning, and cold. The problem with that is, on the passive skill tree, if you try to get all the different penetrations to deal good damage against bosses, you're going to end up spending a lot of points. There's like 4 points you got to spend here, 4 points you got to spend here. The only fire penetration points are up here, and then you need like even more over here. So it ends up spending like 20, 30 points pathing around the tree just to get penetration. So yeah, it's rough. So, if you don't have that penetration, your damage is basically nothing against these bosses that have 75 resistances. So this point right here, ignoring all elemental resistances of bosses when we critically hit them, is amazing. It's an absolutely must-have for this build because we're tri-elemental. Now, I did try to use the Blue Flame Bracers, which convert a portion of your fire damage into cold to turn it into a cold build. I had some bracers with like 99% of fire damage converted to cold. The reason why you need that extra 1% doing fire damage is because otherwise this helmet will not ignite nearby enemies, which you need to trigger your explosions. But the problem with that setup was, although we did a lot more cold damage and we were able to freeze bosses pretty quickly, and we had really consistent shatters with our Herald of Ice, our damage was just a lot lower than what you can get here with the Hand of Wisdom. These gloves are just exceptional at giving you a lot of flat damage, and you really can't achieve those damage numbers without them. So, yet again, another attack build using Hand of Wisdom. And the nice thing here is that this gives lightning damage based on intelligence, and attack speed based on dexterity. And because we are in this area of the tree here, there's a lot of points that give us extra intelligence and dexterity. A lot of these like crit points here are giving us some extra attributes. We got like extra int here, extra strength, extra int here. We're pathing all the way up here for more int. So we actually get a lot of attributes. We're taking proficiency here, so we get a ton. And this build is making use of the Keystone Chaos Inoculation yet again to make our maximum life 1 and become immune to chaos damage, just because this solves all your problems when it comes to gearing. You no longer need life, you no longer need chaos res. It becomes much easier to fit better stats, to fit stuff like rarity onto your gear, to fit other stats like I don't know, crit chance, crit damage, that kind of stuff. So it's just exceptional to go Chaos Inoculation and still be, relatively tanky. 2.2k energy shield here that then overflows to close to 4.5k. So we're still extremely tanky in maps. We're pretty much immortal in maps. Bosses are not going to one-shot us through the 4.5k energy shield. And the nice thing is, the way I set this build up, we also have a really good amount, a really good amount of evasion. So I'm at 74 evade chance here with 2.2k energy shield. And of course, we're abusing Grim Feast. Grim Feast is absolutely overpowered, and we're going to abuse it until it gets nerfed. So Grim Feast overflowing us to 5k roughly, plus 74% evasion. We are just super tanky. It's impossible for us to die. And then also, I'm using Wind Dancer here with an interesting setup, a new setup, that allows it to basically always crit. And then when it crits, it one-shots enemies. So enemies come close to us, they hit us, and then they all die. So that's, and it starts our hail chain. And like I said before, the hail chain is doing like 80,000 damage. So, you know, you got the, this is not just defensive, it's also an offensive skill. So basically, if you get hit in melee range, everything around you dies. So it's amazing. So let me go back to the skill tree. So the reason why we went Invoker was for this point. But that's not the only reason. Another reason is the Invoker gets just a good amount of free spirit from this Ascendancy node, which again frees up slots on our gear, makes it easier to gear, and allows us to run a lot more auras that are going to help our damage and help our clear speed. As well as Invoker just happens to be one of the, if not the best class to get those like Herald chains to trigger, because it has extra damage as cold and extra damage as lightning. And the breakpoint here to get these Heralds to trigger each other is one has to, Herald of Ice has to be able to shock, and Herald of Thunder has to be able to freeze. And to get that, you need them to deal a good amount of the opposite damage type. And this is helping a lot with that. So Invoker just has a lot going for it here. We ended up dropping Protect Me From Harm from my previous builds just because in practice this didn't really do that much. I mean, I guess it was okay, but with the way armor currently works, it's pretty bad against big hits, and those are probably the ones that you're more worried about. The smaller hits don't really matter. You're going to evade most of those anyway, so yeah. The big hits that bosses do can't be evaded because they're just AoE attacks, so this wasn't really doing anything. So we got rid of that, and instead now we're running the Sunder My Enemies because we are a crit build. Now, the way that we get all of this damage and we go crit, there's a few ways to scale our crit. So first of all, this bow is maybe not the best example because this is an insane bow. This bow is worth quite a lot. I ended up sniping this for 17 divines, which I thought was a relatively good deal. But this bow has a massive 9.5% crit chance here. I think ideally you'll get by just fine with something with like 8.5, but we really want that extra crit chance because the bow by default has a really low base crit of 5%. So you need to get that percent up to be able to scale crit effectively. The base crit is the most important stat because it is the one that is being multiplied by our increased critical strike chance. So getting a really high base crit bow is nice. Also, we're looking for bow attacks fire 2 additional arrows because gas arrow is actually a skill that can shotgun. So this bow here with the implicit as well as the 2 additional arrows and the arrow I'm always shooting, that's 4 total arrows that can overlap. That damage can overlap. So basically, whatever this number is here in my character or in my gem window here, this is 4 multiply this times 4. That's the actual damage. So we're close to 500,000 here, and with all our buffs up, it's probably closer to 1 million damage per attack, which is insane. And with how fast we can attack with this, you can see how that can get out of hand. We're able to kill the tier 4 pinnacle bosses in like roughly 10 seconds or under 10 seconds for me. I got a 7-second kill earlier in the video. All right, so you need a bow with a lot of crit. Now, a way to scale crit besides just getting a good bow is actually with the quiver. And the way we can do this is by using a thing called quiver effectiveness, which you can get a few places. The first place is by getting these points here on the tree. These give you increased bonuses gained from a quick quiver. This will increase the crit chance that the quiver is giving us, as well as all the flat damage, the attack speed, the crit damage. Basically, everything on this quiver is getting multiplied by this here. So getting a really good quiver like this one is going to help immensely with your damage. And then moving on, there's another source where you can get them. And that is here. Increased bonuses gained from equipped quiver. You can get this on jewels. So you're going to want to look for jewels with like crit chance and equipped quiver bonuses, as well as stuff like attack damage, elemental damage. For me, because everything in maps dies so quickly, and I don't really need more damage against like normal monsters, I've decided to go for increased damage with hits against rare and unique enemies, because for me, everything gets one shot. Even the Delirium bosses in maps get one shot. But I just want to be able to kill the tier 4 map bosses and pinnacle bosses a little bit quicker, so that stat had more priority for me. But for you guys, when you're just starting out with this build, just look for stuff like here I've got elemental damage. This one's got some more elemental damage. This one over here has attack damage. Damage with heralds is also okay if you want better clear. Stuff like attack speed and bow damage is also okay, but that will only affect your gas arrow. It will not affect your heralds. So I like to go for stats that affect both my gas arrow as well as my herald so that they all get benefit. So elemental damage, attack damage, that kind of stuff is good to have. Another good one for single target, if you can fit it in, is magnitude of shock. This build is actually trying to get a lot of magnitude, and we're doing exponential multiplying of our magnitude by using a few things, namely a skill called Voltaic Mark. So this skill will increase the effect of shock on a marked enemy. And basically what this does is your base shock is like 20%, and then you're multiplying that times 1.47 here with this mark effect, with this mark. And then that mark is also being scaled by all these points on the tree. We have points on the tree that are increased mark effect. As you could see in the previous video where I killed the boss, I had a 68% shock on the boss, which effectively is making us do 68% more damage to them. Basically a 1.68 multiplier on our whole damage, which is insane. It nearly doubles our damage. And you can scale the shock magnitude even more if you had it on your jewels. But the way that we're getting such big shock magnitude, like I said, is the mark effect, as well as using a support gem called Overcharge. And this support gem is extremely underrated. Very few people use this, but if you do the math on this, if it's taking you from like a 40% shock up to a 68% shock, then this is technically a 28% more damage support that people are just not utilizing. And since this build doesn't struggle for damage, AoE damage really, this is going to help a lot with bosses and those tanky rares and, you know, unique monsters. So yeah, this is insane. The support is way better than people think. And shock duration does not matter if we're hitting them every second because we're going to reapply shocks constantly. So the duration is irrelevant. And yeah, so we're scaling shock magnitude. We're being able to freeze the boss, or, you know, eventually you'll be able to freeze the boss. I have actually not gotten enough levels here. I'm level 94. At level 95, I will get this point here, which is going to help me freeze bosses way quicker. And I'll get to freeze the pinnacle bosses probably within, you know, a few seconds. And then I won't have to deal with any mechanics at all. I'll just ignore them all. I'll just kill him before he does anything. So yeah, insane. So that's kind of like the showcase of the tree here. I'll go over it more in depth later, but I'm trying to just, you know, showcase the mechanics of how the build works. So I have been able to get my crit chance here with a really insane bow, like I showed, with all that quiver scaling. I've been able to get it now to 53%, which is kind of around the breakpoint you want to be at. At 50%, you're going to be able to guarantee crit with a thing called ambush, and this gives you 100% more crit chance against enemies at full life. So when our Herald is triggering, and it's triggering on enemies that are just outside of our ignite range on our helmet, it'll always be critting. And that is allowing that Herald chain to travel really far, because when it crits, it's doing double the damage it says here, because this damage number is based on it critting 50% of the time. So whatever this number is, double that. So it's over 50,000 damage with our Herald device. Absolutely insane. And this is only a level 19 Herald device. It'll probably be closer to 30,000, which would be doubled to 60,000 on a level 20 Herald device. So insane. Also, another thing is because I have this, 9.53 quiver or bow, and then I have this point down here that is giving me a +1 to critical hit chance. This adds to your base critical hit chance. That means that my total base critical hit chance with the bow plus this is 10.5. And that 10.5 is then turning into 53%. And what that means is that every 10% base crit is another 50% crit for me on how it's being multiplied. And that means with this skill right here, Eye of Winter, which applies a thing called critical weakness, this stacks up to 20 times. Each stack has 0.5 critical hit chance. So with 20 stacks on a boss, that means that the boss will then have 10% increased chance to be crit. And that 10% base crit is then going to be multiplied by all our increased chances to crit. And so basically, with Eye of Winter, putting this critical weakness on a boss, we have a 100% crit chance against that boss. And that is how you're able to basically deal with bosses. You only need 50% crit in maps. You're doing so much damage, it doesn't really matter either way. Your Herald device is always going to be critting, but on bosses, we can ensure we get 100% crit chance against the boss by using Eye of Winter. So Voltaic Mark to give us a big shock, increasing our damage by 68%, and then Eye of Winter to guarantee our crits, which effectively is doubling this damage number here. So it would be 266, I guess, 266, that's how much damage we're doing when we're critting, times 2, because that's the buffs that we're getting, times how many arrows we've got, which is, we're shooting 3 on the bow here, and then our initial one, times 4. That is 2 million damage per attack. That is absurd. And then that times 1.68 for our shock value. We're doing 3.57 million damage per attack. Okay, I made a mistake. It's not that insane. It's only, what is that, 3.5 million damage per second, not per attack. Okay, per attack is a little different. Based on our attack speed, we're attacking every 0.3 seconds. So the way that this damage number is being calculated is it's basically the damage of 3 attacks combined. But 3.5 million damage per second, and we're doing 0.3 attacks per second, means that the actual damage per attack is still over 1 million. So yeah, insane. All right, so that's how we get all this damage. Now, let me go over in depth kind of the skills here and why I'm using what I'm using. So first off, gas arrow here, I'm using level 20. This is our main skill, and we're using martial tempo just for more attack speed. It's good. Primal armament, of course, we're doing all 3 different elements of damage, and my weapon here has quite a bit of cold, fire, and lightning damage, so more weapon elemental damage is a really good support. If I take this out, we lose a lot of damage. Immolate, this one's actually not being calculated on this number here, but this is always active because we're igniting nearby enemies, so you could say that this is just a 30% more damage support. Incredible. Concentrated effect. Now, this is one you don't necessarily need to run if you have the kind of damage I have. This is something you could run just for bosses to get more boss damage, because it does lower the AoE of your gas arrow by 40% or 50%. So this one is optional. I use it for bosses, and honestly, because my heralds are basically killing everything in maps for me, I'd rather just hit harder so that I can trigger them easier. So I just went for this. You could run something like mobility if you wanted to get around a little bit quicker. If your damage is like good enough, you don't really need the extra damage from concentrated effect. So what mobility does is it allows you to move 30% faster while you're shooting your arrow, and that might be a nice support to use just to get around quicker. And I don't know why I can't put it in. I must be using it somewhere. Oh, I'm using it on my Iowa winner. But yeah, this will allow you to just move a little bit faster while you're shooting. Not that much faster, but that's an option if you already have way too much damage. And then finally, overcharge, like I already mentioned, super underrated support. It's amazing against bosses, but even not bosses, even in maps, applying a bigger shock to nearby enemies is just going to make them take more damage from your heralds and stuff. So like it's good. It's really good. And because this skill, shotguns, it hits multiple times, and that means that the first hit can apply the shock, and then the later hits can benefit from that shock, especially if you have multiple things of gas on the ground. So yeah, it's actually getting great value here. Now, moving on to Eye of Winter. This we're using mainly for bosses. I mean, really only on bosses. You don't need it any other time. This is on a 6-link or a 5 socket. You don't really need that. The main thing you want to look for here is you want to use a level 13 just so you don't have as much mana cost, and you don't want to put any quality on it, because quality is going to give it projectile speed. And the whole point of this skill is when you lower the projectile speed, I could kind of showcase it here. The projectiles are all a little bit closer together, and we want them to all be closer together so that when we hit the boss, we're going to apply those 20 stacks of critical weakness all at the same time. So we want to get those stacks all on the boss immediately. And so we're putting Unleash here to get 2 of them to shoot out, which is just more projectiles overall. Deceleration, which is lowering that projectile speed, like we said. Scattershot, this gives more projectiles on the final explosion here. As you can see, there's a ton of projectiles there, allowing us to get more of those crit weakness stacks. Arcane Tempo, you probably don't really need this. This is just like, it feels nicer to have a little bit more cast speed on this. And then Mobility, honestly, you don't need that either. That's just like, while I'm like starting out the boss, I can move around a little bit better. You don't need that. So honestly, the first 3 links are really all that you need, but I ended up going and getting it fully socketed here. All right. Next is Voltaic Mark. So this one, you could put Persistence on here. That is totally fine. If you have a little bit of extra strength, that's going to increase the duration. But because we have stuff here on the skill tree, like this point here, 60% increased effect, mark effect duration. And then I think there's another point down here that gives mark effect duration. We actually have a really long mark. And I'm killing bosses before it expires. I have a 16-second mark here. So, I mean, I don't know if I really need Persistence. I guess technically I could run it, and I'll just put it in for now. I think the reason why I wasn't running it is because I didn't have enough strength or something, but if you have the strength for it, you can put it in, and now we have an insane 23-second mark. That's definitely enough time, so you only are going to need to cast it 1 time on the boss, and it'll pretty much be up for the entire boss fight, which is super convenient. Moving on, Ghost Dance. So there are a couple versions of this build, okay? Don't look at this, okay? This version is kind of an endgame version when you've got enough crit. If you're struggling to get crit, there is a setup you can use with Charge Infusion and Combat Frenzy. So we are going to be freezing enemies, and those freezes are going to cause Combat Frenzy here to generate us Frenzy charges. And then those Frenzy charges, with 1 point right here on the skill tree, with Resonance, we can convert those Frenzy charges into power charges. And the reason why we want power charges, you gain power charges instead of Frenzy, is because Charge Infusion here is going to give us, if you have a level 20 version of this gem, it'll give you 20% more critical hit chance if you have a power charge. And that is a more multiplier on our crit. So if you're struggling to get to 50% crit, if you're at like 40% or something, then this is going to help greatly at getting you to that break point. So this is an option you can run while you're struggling to get that crit. And basically the supports I would run in here are, I think Profusion is the one that's going to allow you to get more Frenzy charges, and then Charge Infusion doesn't really have any supports that work for it, so you just leave it blank. But yeah, that is the setup that you can run when you're struggling to get more crit. Once you have enough crit, I am opting here because I have a really good body armor that gives me a ton of spirit. I can actually fit a lot of stuff. I am fitting here with 248 spirits. I am fitting Ghost Dance and Blink in, and this is just allowing me to have a lot more mobility, as well as Ghost Dance being a little extra layer of defense if I'm not overflowed on my energy shield and I get hit. Because we have so much evasion in the build, I'm actually able to mitigate like 440 damage, and we get 5 of these stacks. So 5 times 440, I mean, it's pretty damn good. Now, Wind Dancer is what's giving us all that evasion. It is basically multiplying our base evasion by roughly, let's see, this one's a 19% more evasion. At level 20, I think it goes up to 20%. So you get 4 of these stacks. It can go up to 80% more evasion rating per stage. So you can get 80% more evasion with just Wind Dancer active at 4 stacks. And this Wind Dancer is not just a defensive thing. Like I showed in the showcase, it also can one-shot nearby enemies when they hit you. And we're using Blind here and Maim to basically allow it to weaken enemies so that, like, if they do hit us and survive, they're not going to be able to do much after that. They're going to be blinded, which is making them have less accuracy rating so that they have even a lower chance to hit us. That'll basically make our evade chance nearly 100% against them. Now, with Wind Dancer here, I came up with an interesting setup. By using crit on Wind Dancer to kind of guarantee it crits. So Wind Dancer is interesting because it has here on the Gale Force, if you look at the Gale Force, if I can pull it up here, I don't know why it's not staying. Let me pull it out. If you take Gale Force here, it says +5 to critical hit chance, and this is +5 to the base crit chance. So this skill actually has a really good chance of critting. Here with these supports in, it's at 75% chance once it builds up a little bit, and you can get this up to 100% chance if you use this support gem here called Potential. If you're running the power charge setup, you probably don't need Maim. You're going to run a support called Potential, and this will consume one of those power charges that you have to give the skill 30% more chance to critically hit. And that will basically bring this number to 100%. So it'll always crit, and because we're running super critical, which gives us 100% increased crit damage, this skill is going to hit really, really hard, and that hit will then shatter enemies, which will then cause our hails to go off. So basically, we're stacking defense by going offense. Anything that comes in contact with us is going to die. It's going to get hit by Gale Force and just get one shot, and then everything around that will also die. So yeah, interesting setup you can run if you've got a lot of crit. For me, I'm not running that setup because I won't have power charges with my 2 Ghost Dance and Blink. I'm not using the Charge Infusion and Combat Frenzy anymore because I've reached that break point of 50% crit chance without them. So yeah, I'm running a little bit different setup, but I don't recommend this until you can get your crit up there. Now, Grim Feast, this is obviously just the most broken aura in the entire game for energy shield builds. It's basically doubling our effective hit pool while we're mapping. And we're running Clarity, Precision, and Herbalism. I was able to fit all 3 because I've got so much Spirit. If you don't have as much Spirit, these are not that important. Clarity's kind of nice. We have some mana problems sometimes. Not really, but I'm actually playing the build without any mana recovery on kill stuff. I just have a lot of mana regeneration here on my 2 rings, which is being multiplied by my Ingenuity belt. But while mapping, if you don't have rings like this, like 1-2% mana on kill jewel will pretty much solve all your issues. Or if you get mana on kill on your rings, that'll also kind of solve your issues while mapping. On bosses, the goal is to kill the boss before mana becomes a problem. We kill them within 1 mana pool. For tier 4 map bosses, I kill them basically instantly, so like I don't even care about mana. But yeah, if you can fit it, clarity, precision, and herbalism. And herbalism here, increased recovery from life flask while support skill is active. This is actually allowing us here with our passive skill tree. We're taking a thing called Eternal Youth, which allows our life flask to apply to energy shield. That means if you take damage, you could just click your life flask and you'll get your energy shield back. And this basically is pairing with that, allowing us to get 30% more recovery. Moving on, the heralds. So this herald setup is something that's already been being used by a lot of builds. And it is basically getting your Herald of Ice to shock, which will then cause you to trigger Herald of Thunder, and then that Herald of Thunder is freezing enemies, and that's causing you to shatter enemies with Herald of Ice. So they're basically piggybacking off of each other. And to get this to work, you'll need a lot of flat damage, which I already have here, but we're running Innervate and Conduction. This is allowing us to get extra damage when we shock an enemy, and Conduction is making it easier to shock them. I'm not running Lightning Infusion because I don't need it. I have enough lightning damage as it is. A lot of lightning damage from my gloves, so I'm not running that. You could run that if you have less damage than I do, but I'm getting pretty consistent shocks, so I don't really need to run it. Magnified Effect, this is important because Herald of Ice is like the biggest AoE of the two Heralds, and we want that AoE even bigger so it can chain further. Long Shot, just allowing us, again, to chain even further. The further it goes away from us, the more damage it'll deal, so that'll, help us kill further enemies. And then Ambush, this is basically giving us 100% more crit chance. And because my Herald has 53% crit, that means it'll always crit against enemies on full life. Moving on to Herald of Thunder, we're taking Ice Bite. This is, again, giving us more cold damage when we freeze an enemy, and this is going to be our skill that's freezing enemies. Cold Infusion, we do want our cold portion on this skill to be quite high so that we can freeze. So, I mean, that's kind of one of the harder things to achieve with the build is getting your Herald of Thunder to freeze. So I've opted to get like cold damage as pretty much everywhere I can get it. I have it on my bow, I have it on my quiver, I have at least one cold breach ring here. And then there are things in the passive tree we take like Thin Ice, which gives freeze buildup. Eventually I'll be taking Essence of Mountain, which is more freeze buildup. Stuff like that is going to help with that. And then moving on, Glaciation. This allows us to have much easier time freezing with, Herald of Thunder. Lightning Mastery, this is just more damage. And then Execute. So basically, the way Herald of Thunder works is it triggers on attack hits. So when you have, you're going to have, a buff here that's going to show your Herald of Thunder. You'll have, 3 or 4 of those. That means the next 3 or 4 attack hits you do with, Gas Arrow, they will trigger a Herald of Thunder on that hit. And so that means that they're going to be getting hit first by the Gas Arrow, and then they're going to be getting hit by Herald of Thunder. So they're already going to be relatively low. For me, they're always dead. I mean, I just one-shot them, but if you're struggling for damage more than I am, they'll be relatively low after getting hit by their Gas Arrow, and then Herald of Thunder will execute them, dealing 40% more damage to enemies that are on low life, and that big hit that it deals will have a good chance of then freezing them, and then when they get frozen and die, they will shatter with Herald of Ice. So this helps the consistency of getting those shatters, and it pairs really well kind of, with our main combo of Gas Arrow followed, by Herald of Thunder triggering, freezing, and then Herald of Ice triggering and, shattering everything around it. So that is the setup for the skill gems. All right, so one final thing to mention here, if you are not struggling for survivability at all, or maybe you don't really care for using Blink, and you're running the non-power charge setup, then another option to run as another, aura would be Herald of Ash. That would make you run all 3 auras at the same time. And this one's kind of nice because it technically is igniting enemies, which is going to make those, Gas Arrow be able to hit enemies even further away outside of the range of our helmet and explode those. So this is kind of nice for giving us kind of more range on our Gas Arrow. But also, it's going to be benefiting from Coming Calamity since we'll be affected by Herald of Ash, giving us more fire damage. So this actually doesn't give us that much damage if I activate and deactivate it here. It's only increasing my damage by 3,000, so it's not that great. But the increased range and clear speed might be worth it overall. And this overkill damage that it ignites enemies for, this 18% of damage, overkill damage for an ignite, that's actually going to be a really big ignite for me, especially since I'm overkilling monsters by close to 1 million damage. So I mean, a 1 million damage overkill ignite is going to be big. So yeah, this is an option if you want to run it. All right, so next up I'll be going over the gear real quick. I've already shown this bow. It's absolutely insane. Triple elemental with crit chance and 2 arrows. Really, really good. I end up using the crit damage runes here because I didn't have a lot of flat fizz on this bow, so those percent fizz runes didn't make as much sense. The quiver, this one, it could be better if I had a quiver with, I think there's a crit chance for attacks, implicit quiver, then my crit chance would be even higher because that number is going to be scaled by all my quiver effect on my tree and on my jewels. So there is a better quiver out there, but this one is really, really good as it is, and it's kind of hard to find quivers like this. And this has cold damage, which is helping us freeze, as well as a bunch of crit chance, crit damage, and attack speed. And yeah, just get one with as much flat damage as you can. Ideally, some cold damage mixed in there, and then these other stats. The amulet, basically, I wanted rarity with a bunch of crit chance and some crit damage, as well as some resistances. Very nice one. Not the best out there. You could get one with percent increased energy shield as well on the prefix, which would be nice for giving us more energy shield and survivability. But this one's pretty damn good as it is. The life roll is completely useless, but I got this one relatively cheap. And the anoint we're going for here is Storm Charged. Storm Charge is really good for this build because it's not only giving us 20% increased crit, which we need, but it's also 40% increased elemental damage, which is just an insane amount if we crit recently, and we're always critting, so this is always up. Now, next up we have these Breach Rings. These are pretty damn good. I got these back when they were cheap, and I got these for a few exalts like a week or two ago, but the prices on these types of rings have gone way up, so it's going to be tough to get these. But this one is basically a bunch of lightning damage, a bunch of rarity, some resistances, and a nice bit of mana regen as well as evasion. We do want evasion as much as we can get, and because the belt multiplies the evasion on rings, it's actually one of the best stats to get here on the rings. So this is pretty close to like a perfect ring that you could get. And then the next one is similar, but now I'm using one with cold damage, a bunch of evasion again, more res, and then mana regeneration, because yeah, the mana problems can be rough if you don't have any source of mana regeneration anywhere. Mana on kill will be great during maps, but mana regeneration here is really good for bosses because, again, it's being multiplied by the belt. These 2 rings with like 50 mana regen ends up giving me like over 200% increased mana regeneration by using Ingenuity. And that is our belt. This can be better. It's a 74% roll, but yeah, that belt is insane. It's the best belt in the game, besides maybe like Headhunter, but yeah. This belt is incredible. You want to get one with at least 70%. More is better, but yeah. The body armor, this is what's giving me so much spirit. I've got one here with 11,440. And some nice suffixes with dexterity, some lightning res. Stun threshold is actually a really nice stat for a CI build because your maximum life is what gives you your stun threshold. And since our maximum life is only 1, well, we have a very low stun threshold, basically no stun threshold. We get some stun threshold from this point here, 12% of our maximum energy shield as additional stun threshold. That's okay, but you ideally want to get some sources of stun threshold elsewhere on the gear if you can. So getting this 269 stun threshold on the armor is really nice. And I got lucky with the lucky with the Vol Orb, giving me 4% additional physical damage reduction. That was a big gamble because this armor was quite expensive, but I got lucky. The boots here, again, they're kind of fixing my resistances. Actually, these don't have any resistances. I take that back. But these here, they give me some int, which is more damage with the gloves. Stun threshold, again, basically making me immune to stuns. Rarity, as good as always. Hopefully they actually remove it from the game because I want to be stronger and not have FOMO all the time for not running more Magic Find. But yeah. For now, while it's OP, we got to use it. And then just movement speed and some energy shield. This is honestly not the best pair of boots. I could do better, but I like the stun threshold and the rarity and the int. The prefixes matter a little bit less. As long as you have like 25 movement speed, you'll be okay. And then the gloves here. This one is quite nice. This is a Corrupted Hand of Wisdom in action with the 1 to 12 lightning damage to attacks. So it's actually giving us more damage than the normal kind. And I just slapped some rarity runes in there because why not? My resistances are fully capped. I am sitting now at like 10% overcapped, which is good for those maps that have elemental weakness. So we've solved our resistances. We're immune to chaos, so this doesn't matter. Our evasion is quite high. We got okay mana pool, decent energy shield pool, and a ton of spirit. Now for the flasks, I'm just running some random ones. Ideally, you want quality on them, and you want to gain charges on kill and increase the amount recovered. And then I'm a greedy boy, so I'm running the gold charm Maybe you could run a freeze charm because we don't have a lot of freeze threshold as a CI build, so that might be some kind of defense that you try to solve with a freeze charm. But for me, if I get frozen in like the middle of a bunch of enemies, I just pause the game and I log out and I re-enter the map. I do not have to deal with freezes because yeah, I'm a cheater. So I like running the gold charm because I just love getting more loot, and this will give me a little bit, slightly more loot. So yeah, that's kind of the gear setup. The weapon swap here is fairly straightforward. We are swapping to a wand and a focus. And really all we're looking for here is cast speed. We want to be able to cast our Eye of Winter and our Voltaic Mark a lot faster. But also what you could look for if you have trouble getting enough intelligence is this reduced attribute requirement stat here is going to make it easier to use one of these wands that has a high int requirement. So I found one like that with 30 cast speed. And then again, another 32 cast speed on our shield. All right, so now I'll go a little bit more in depth on the skill tree and kind of what we're aiming for here. So we're aiming to get all the relevant crit points on the tree. That is what's going to give us a lot of crit. I've been able with my insane bow to drop a lot of these like increased critical hit chance in favor of increased critical damage bonus, which is making me deal a lot more damage. But if your build is struggling to get to that 50% crit, then basically you're just going to take the opposite. So this one has two options, crit damage or crit chance. If you need crit, go for crit chance. If you don't, go crit damage. Kind of the same thing over here. We got 2 crit chance points versus 1 crit damage point. This one saves travel, so I ended up taking this. I would take this even if you are trying to get more crit. And then we're getting all the crit stuff over here, more crit stuff over here, more crit stuff over here. Pretty much every crit point we can get that's nearby. This is probably one of the most important, if not the most important area, because of the +1 base crit it gives. That is being multiplied by all our increased critical strike chance, as well as we get a decent amount of attributes here, which is nice to have. So these points are incredible. And yeah, we're just pathing through these crit points here up to our points that are giving us energy shield since we're CI. We want to come over here and grab Spectral Ward. This is giving us a lot of extra energy shield per evasion on our body armor. That's why we're running a hybrid body armor. And then that evasion rating on our body armor is getting doubled here with the bestial skin. So those are some of the really good defensive points to look out for. I'm using a controlled metamorphosis to save a lot of travel points here. We're getting 5 really good notable points within this ring. And for this one, you're going to be looking for either medium large or large. With ideally the less penalty to elemental resistances. The chaos resistance penalty is irrelevant because we're immune, but try to get one with like 5 or 6 to all negative to all elemental resistances, so you can help cap your resistances. I ended up pathing down here, taking this. This gives 55%, not 55% of physical damage taken as random element, which basically just mitigates some more physical damage. That paired with my body armor here with 4%. Basically means 9% of physical damage I'm not taking anymore because it'll be taken either to my resistances or just not taken at all by this body armor. So that helps a little bit with physical damage. Over here we're taking all the quiver stuff, as I mentioned before. Our weapon swap is taking pretty much everything related to any kind of mark magnitude or mark effect because we want our mark to be better. And then I actually went for this. Skill speed, this is technically cast speed. So when we weapon swap and we're using our Voltaic Mark and our Eye of Winter, this is going to give us a lot more cast speed to just make that a little smoother. So I didn't really need any of the other mark points, so I just went for that since it was on the way. Over here, we're taking the Herald damage while affected by Heralds, and we are going to be affected by 2 Heralds, so we're getting a bunch of lightning and cold damage here. And then, let's see, what else is there? I guess some of the notable points are Eternal Youth is allowing us to get that energy shield when we use our flask. CI, obviously, we're a CI build. If you're going for the power charge stacking setup, you're going to want to take Resonance so you can get power charges with Combat Frenzy. Thin Ice, this is really good for allowing us to get better freeze buildup to make those freezes more consistent. And then, yeah, we're coming over here to get more energy shield, more ints. Int is actually giving us damage with the gloves. And yeah, that's kind of the tree overall. The next point for me at level 95 will be this Essence of Mountain to make those freezes on bosses more consistent. But I'm pretty sure this is like one of the more optimal setups you can run. Now, they ended up changing this. This point used to give us 80% increased attack damage because the way that CI was working was it was counting you as both on full and low life at the same time. But this has since been changed, I think, in the patch. So this point is a little less valuable. It's only 30% increased attack damage. So if you wanted to cut something to make some room for something else, if you're lower level than me, you can cut these 3 points to try and get something else that's a little bit better. It's still a good point to have, but maybe you just need 3 points for something really key. But yeah, that is kind of the passive skill tree overview. Now, all these jewel sockets here, I try to get every single jewel socket I could get while traveling, because all of these are a massive damage increase to our build. So every single jewel socket is really important. I might even, drop some points. Like I might drop these points here to just, spend another 3 points to go get another jewel socket once I get a good jewel to put in there. So yeah. All right, so a lot of people have been asking me in previous videos to show more gameplay of my builds in action, so I will be doing that here. I'll be showcasing here a Breach. This is on the hardest difficulty. Here, I'll show you that. See, as you can see, I've got all the points allocated. This is a +4 version of Zesh, the hardest version. And the nice thing about the Breach here, the Breachstone boss, is that you can see enemies leading up to it. So as you can see there, that was my Wind Dancer triggering, basically killing everything around me because it crit. So yeah, Wind Dancer is amazing as both defensive and offensive tool to help us survive. And as you can see here, the AoE is really good. All our heralds are triggering. I'm currently using Concentrated Effect, which lowers my AoE a little bit on my gas arrow, but you don't necessarily need to run that if you've got enough damage. But yeah, the clearing is amazing. Mapping feels really, really smooth. Breaches, you basically just spam your arrow on the edges of the breach and everything dies. It's really, really nice. And we're going to try to get to the boss here. So, as you can see, my energy shield is already overcharged, or overflowed to 4.4k, and I'm basically not getting hit because everything's getting one shot, and I'm even able to like shoot ahead of the breach here and kill stuff as it spawns, which is kind of hilarious. So as soon as stuff spawns, it dies. It all gets, one shot. And yeah, the gas arrow is just such a nice ability to use. Here, as you can see, I'm at 318,000 damage with some of my buffs up on my gas arrow, which is absurd. And that damage, again, like I said, is being multiplied by 4 arrows plus our shock plus a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, insane damage on that. So yeah, we're gonna get through this as fast as we can. This is kind of a slow roll here to the boss, but you should have no issues clearing up till the boss. You're not going to run out of time or anything like that. And we're almost there, I think. So yeah, the damage, as you can see, insane. And the heralds here with some of the buffs up, let's see, what do they go to? 64,000 and 56,000. So yeah, that Herald of Ice would actually be doubled because we're always critting with it. So that's like over 120,000 Herald of Ice, which is comical. All right, here we go. Let's see how this goes. So I am actually using Unbound Fury for the boss. You can swap that in and out for boss or for pinnacle bosses. You don't necessarily need that during mapping. But I'm going to try to apply some gas on the ground here so that as soon as he spawns, he takes damage. And then the goal is to mark him, apply critical weakness with Eye of Winter, and then just go to town. So I'm using Eye of Winter here. And I run out of mana a little bit. I use my mana flask, but dead. And yeah, that is the hardest difficulty version of this boss. Dead in roughly 7 seconds. Alright guys, thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As you can see, this is probably one of my best builds yet, if not the best build yet. Of course, the budget is higher than like my Explode Invoker was, but this is an endgame build, and the potential is really, really high with good gear. And just being ranged also is nice over the Invoker, just being able to stay back and, kill enemies from afar. I like this playstyle a little bit better. And we can still fit in a lot of the things that makes the build feel comfortable to play. We have a decent amount of movement speed. We can use Blink. I mean, a lot of the things that are kind of like quality of life, we've been able to fit into the build. So yeah, my best build yet by far. Delete pinnacle bosses, completely trivialize all content in the game. Maps are a joke. Everything gets one shot. And it's a monstrous build. So hope you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you guys in the next one. And as always, take care.